Welcome back, my friends. It's Melanie Benson here, Profit Amplifier and host of Amplify Your Success podcast. I'm doing a special series. I was inspired to pull together some of my favorite people who have been really successful with podcast guesting and really have an insider knowledge of what it's like to book people on podcasts so they can tell you what they're looking for. My job today is to inspire you, give you tools and behind the scenes proven tips and maybe a few secrets along the way to really get you to share your message on podcasts and virtual platforms. Now, here's a little bit behind my method behind my madness here. I have found that guesting on podcasts is one of the best ways to not just share my message and attract clients, but to open a floodgate of opportunities. And if you caught the first 2 days of the series where I talked to people like JJ Fuzanes and basically Melinda Woodstock, every single person I talked to was saying that one of the benefits of getting active on podcasts, being seen over and over and over again, was that there was this wealth of speaking opportunities and networking connections and things that you cannot get access to any other way because of the relationships you're building. So I want you to make a commitment to get a magnetic message and start sharing them on podcasts. I'm going to, on the break between speakers today, I'm going to share a couple more tips on why I find this so valuable. So stay tuned. I want to bring up one of my most favorite people on the planet, Mr. Jim Palmer. Captain
Hello,
Jim
Melanie.
Palmer. Not just Mr. Jim Palmer.
I know. I can drive a boat.
And that's what happens when you have a dream business. So
That's it.
Jim is host of Dream Business Radio. He has the Dream Business Academy. He and I have been friends for 15
10,
years?
12?
Oh, no, it's longer than that. 12, 14 at least. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we're setting records here, Captain.
I know.
So I invited Jim to join this conversation today for a couple of reasons. One, he was one of the first podcasters I knew. He's had a podcast for a really long time. But what I watched him do early on in this whole podcasting movement was tap into the power of podcasts to create buzz and momentum and attract clients. And Jim, when we were in the green room, you were sharing with me a little bit about your traction that you got. Let's just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about what you experienced when you got on podcasts.
Well, what's interesting is a mutual friend of ours, Adam Urbanski, many moons ago, I mentioned to him, because there was about a year where I did 32 speaking gigs, just getting on planes, traveling around the country, etc. And I said, God, I hate traveling. And then, after 9/11, it got, really wonky. And he said, I just stay at home and do interviews on podcasts and radio shows, stuff like that. And I go, wonder why I didn't think of that. But thanks for the tip. I know, ding, ding, ding. So I started doing that. Now, right about the time when I wrote my first book, I've written 7, as you know. You're kind of the co-author of this one here, Decide. Where's my camera?
Co-author of Decide.
Co-author. I know. You'll never let me live that one down. But anyway, so I started doing a bunch of interviews. And to give my daughter a plug, when she came to work, Jessica Rose came to work for me as a virtual assistant when she was pregnant with Nathan, which was like 7 years ago. I had her doing several things, but one of the things I had her do was proactively reaching out to people to get me on more shows, because the ones that people would reach out, hey, can you come talk to us about X, Y, and Z? And I liked it. I enjoyed it. I'm animated. And, talking to someone like you, when you're doing a good interview, you just like to share. It's like you forget that you could have 10 or 1,000 people listening or watching, whatever. And I said, yeah, get me more of those. Now, she turned that since into her business, Interview Connections. So she's really doing well. But Melanie, I did, in about a 3-year period of time, or maybe a little bit more, I did almost 300 guest appearances on other people's podcasts. And I just started my 9th year of Dream Business Radio, 9 years. And I remember when I started that, I'm like, man, I'm really late to the party. Look at all these podcasts. Well, it's like millions now. But what I found out is that the more I was doing these interviews, the more speaking engagements I got offered, the more connections I had, the more people that wanted to do JVs. And it was just this exposure as a result. And to me, to jump on camera and, 20 minutes ago, I was in a ratty t-shirt because I was clean. And so I come down, put on a semi-clean shirt, jump on my camera and like give some good information, hopefully, and make some connections. And then boom, the mic will go off. I don't have to go back to the airport. I can just go back to my captain's chair.
And we should probably clarify, because we both know this, but Jim is coming live to us from a really beautiful boat. Where are you parked?
I am in Chesapeake, Maryland. This is my living room / salon, they call it. Yeah, so we're kind of but yeah, you can't see Blue's down at my feet. So he's 14 now, so he's really getting on there.
Oh, we love our dogs.
Yeah.
So you just said something that I think is worth coming back to. First of all, it was so impressive to see you, like do that blitz. And I remember talking to you because at that time you were doing a lot of live events. And I'm curious if you remember back then how doing these podcast guest spots was helping you fill your events.
Well, first of all, back in the day, when we were starting to do this, I would do an interview like I'm doing with you today, and it would probably go live in a week, maybe 4 weeks. Today, you do an interview with somebody. Oh, it's coming out in November, possibly, so it makes it a little bit harder to do that. But again, back when I was starting, it was a much less of a lead time, Melanie. And so if I was doing an event, say in September, I would be doing a bunch of interviews in the spring and summer. And Abel, in fact, when I got on in the green room chat, I said, when is this likely to go live? Okay. So I got an event coming up in September. I'm not going to mention it every other sentence. You'll kind of put him at ease. I'm not going to be a traveling billboard here with my mouth, but I may mention that. Oh, that's fine. So you might want to find that out. That would be, I guess, one tip right there is when do you expect the show to go live? The other thing which I think really endeared me a little bit to some of the hosts was I would always ask, because they think you always want to come on and what can you promote? I mean, why are you coming on? Now, everybody says, I'm coming on to serve your audience. And that's true. I appreciate that thought and sentiment, but you're also doing it to get exposure and market your business. So there's nothing wrong with, well, I've got a book coming out or I've got this or that. And but I would say that, I want to be able to serve your audience. So yeah, I use that same line. However, I've just launched a book. If we can perhaps mention that at the end of the show or something like that. So I'd always be very upfront about that. That's number 2, I guess. The third thing I would say is I would always put the hosts at ease by saying, I do a lot of interviews myself. I just want you to know I'm not going to put my URL in every other sentence. You can ask me anything you want. Take the conversation. You can't stump me, right? And I would say, some of the shows where you go on and you get the very formulaic, right, approach. If you were stuck on a desert island, what one VHS tape from 1980 would you take with you? I mean, it's like, I guess that might be interesting to some people, but I prefer to have a conversation with a host. Those are the ones that go best, which is, I guess, both a tip for being on a guest, but also if you have your own podcast, just have a straight up conversation. And if somebody gives you a great answer, instead of moving on and changing subjects to your next topic, say, that's really interesting. Let's talk about that a little further. Like you would say, that's very interesting. Let's explore that or whatever you do.
Yeah. I think what you're saying, and this is, we could probably do a whole series on how to be a really magnetic podcast host.
Yep.
Because there are a lot of really boring podcast hosts. And I love your intention and your desire. Please know that, I know that this is a muscle and a skill many of us have to create. And you have to be curious. You cannot just be that rote like, oh, awesome. Next question that the host fed or the guest fed you, right? Like there's something about like that curiosity and that authenticity that people feel when you do that, right?
I learned something, Melanie, when in the late 80s, I took the Dale Carnegie program. It was like a 12 or 14-week course to help you get confidence, become a public speaker, that thing.
When you were 5, right?
Way back when, yeah. Yeah, this is not war paint on my side. One of the things I learned way back then, because it had such an impact on my life, I became a part-time instructor for like 6 years. It was so revolutionary for me. But one of the lessons they said is if you want, and I'm glad we're on camera, if you want your audience or your staff to be this high, you have to be this high, right? So, and what I'm saying is you need to bring the heat. Now, it doesn't matter how much I was waxing the boat earlier. I am doing my best to bring the heat. I'm engaged. I'm trying to bring some enthusiasm and say, one of the things you want to do is make the host look good. I mean, that's being a boring guest. So, I mean, that is one of my tips. Make the host look really good. As many times as I've been a guest, and I'm closing in on 440 of my own podcasts. So I've interviewed a lot of people. You're going to come across people as either a guest or as a host. And you quickly find out that the one sheet, which is the promotional material, has no relevance whatsoever to what they've accomplished, right? Yes. You answer a question and it's like, yeah, I might hit $20,000 gross. And you're thinking this year, right? And you're thinking, okay, just be very, very gracious. It's not the end of the world. Don't pull the plug and say, you know what, come back, when you do something. But I would always, even with people that are brand new as a host, when I'm on their show, I'm there to make them look good. And that's part of, my serve first mentality. I think when you serve and serve and serve, in some cases, you're going to serve the host because they need help. And sometimes you're doing a really good thing. So focus on the audience who's listening, what you can do to help them. And I think if you serve, it's going to come back to you. It's the whole, seed planting thing.
Well, that's a big part of your value structure is the serve,
yes.
of service. I like to think of it too as like when you're a good guest and you're making that host look good, you're also memorable because you're creating this memory, not just for the listeners, which is super important, but for the host. Because guess what? A lot of hosts will ask you back over and over and over and over again because you freaking rocked it. Like you said, you brought the heat. I like to say you bring the fire and you're delivering something that's so valuable and they're getting people emailing them and posting and sharing. That is what we're looking for from a podcast guest. And you have to really drop into your confidence and that passion to pull that off.
So I know this is you're doing this. What are you doing this for? Like the next 30 days? No, you're doing this for a couple days.
I've been thinking this morning, like I'm really loving this series. I might have to do this more often, right?
Right.
So if you would like to see me do it more often, put it in the comments.
So I'm going to share something that you and I would probably share inside of a paid program, but it's a really cool tip. So I know my topic really well. Like I could literally jump on. I have no notes just because I know what I'm. You know what you're going to do, but. So if somebody asks me a question like, what, and a lot of times you're going to get what's the one thing you would tell people about growing a business? And I could probably pull out half a dozen right off the top of my head, but I always go for one, which is you will earn significantly more for who you are than what you do, which is about the branding and positioning. People will be attracted to you and want to hire you more for who you are. It's not about the deliverable. Okay, so there's a tip right there. Have something really big, and that's not generic like, oh, I read Think and Grow Rich. Great book, go get that. Not something that 99 other people are going to say. But the big tip, part 2 of this, what I'm telling you is have a next step. It's almost like, Melanie, because you're nowhere near my age, but not too far in the distance. Remember the 45 records? Did you have a whole collection of them in the metal slots?
Did have them, yes.
Right. And so there's the A side, you bought the record, then there's the B side. So have a B side. So if I was to share that and the people go, I really get that. That's really cool. And there's going to be this tiny little pause because the host is going to look for the next question. And I said, hey, can I share one more thing? I know we're sort of running low on time, but I'd love to share something else if we have time. And it's sort of asking permission to go long, but I'm telling you, they always love that. So if you hook me up and I'm a guest on your show, and I say that, you heard it here first, but then you bring in the next piece of it, which is give something else. So it's like this big, long answer. Because if somebody asks you a question, you don't want to go on for 20 minutes, right? So give them a really good answer, a little time of a pause. Oh, can I give you one more thing? If you have time, I know you've got to watch the clock, but this would be really cool for your guests and your audience if I could do this. And then they're going to say yes. And it gives you an opportunity to serve again, but in full candor. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? It really puts you up there as an expert. They're going to, wow, that was really memorable. Guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's so true. And, everybody's going to find their own authentic way to create that memorability and really like serve the audience, serve the host. When you were going, I know you had Jessica helping you get booked, but do you think there was like one thing you learned from getting booked on all these different podcasts that if we could share it with our listeners today, it might help them get some of those coveted shows under their belt?
I'm going to practice what I just told you. So here's my big tip. All right. So first of all,
and can I go a little longer?
Have somebody pitch you
Yes.
It's so much better than pitching yourself. And by the way, if you don't have a virtual assistant or anything, create one, right? So if I'm Jim at getjimpalmer.com, if I didn't have somebody else doing it for me now, I would create Ann at getjimpalmer.com. And Ann, who would be me, just typing, and thinking and talking. And hey, I'd love to present Jim as a possible guest on your show. So have somebody else pitch you. Part B, Melanie, can I give one more tip? If you have time, I know we're tight on the clock.
How can I set that down?
All right. So for goodness sakes, take time and create what's called a one sheet. I should have printed one and have one up, but I know everybody pretty much knows. So it's your bio. It's very nicely done. It's a picture of you. And it might even say your next great guest and have a headline, just like you'd have a headline in marketing, your next great guest. And then here, a quick short bio, not I was, born in, 1958. Don't have a bio that's, 2,000 words long. Quick bio that can also serve as an intro and give them some sample questions. They can be conversation starters, and every guest is not a great interviewer. Every host is not a great interview. So give them some sample. So it gives them everything they need in one little package, which is your one sheet, 8.5 by 11. And that will help you do it. Because I get pitched a lot. And sometimes it's just an email. Oh, I'd love to be a guest. And then, oh, my boss would love to be a guest. And it's just text in an email, which I'm not going to read. But if there's a one sheet, I will at least open it and look at it. If it looks interesting, I'll read a little bit more. So that's my part A and part B demonstrated of what I just told you.
Great tip. Great tip. And, you can actually pay people on Fiverr. There's professional services that'll do a one sheet for you. And sometimes people are going to really simple, just creating a Google sheet of your topics. And when you're pitching yourself, you can, do that. I will say one thing that drives me nuts, if we can just go to mistakes for a minute, is when people pitch you 7 topics and expect you to pick what you should be a good guest on. Take the time to get to know the show. Take the time to get to know the culture, the relevance that show host is creating, and then pitch a topic you think is a good fit.
And you know what else? Here's how to take it to the next level. Have multiple one sheets. Every time I wrote a book, I created a new one sheet based on that book. So Decide being a mindset book. And then there was, I can't reach them from here. But then, there was Stop Waiting for It to Get Easier. There was Stick Like Glue. All the different books had a one sheet. So it was pitched basically, because people do like to interview authors. I mean, being an author is a pretty cool thing. So it gives you a higher level of presence. So do a one sheet for each one instead of saying, hey, I wrote 7 books. Here are 7 topics. Here's questions for each one. Connect A to B. Just have multiple one sheets. And the other thing you've said multiple times, I want to make sure your audience picks up on this, is you said the authenticity word, which is great. Now, when Steph and I sold our house and we moved on this boat, there was some moment, and I don't know when, I didn't plan it. It's not why we bought. We just did it truly for the adventure. But it occurred to me, I could be Captain Jim, the dream business coach, instead of just Jim. And instead of kind of hiding and saying, kind of downplaying it. This is my boat, man. This is what my dream business, this is the lifestyle it afforded me. I don't do it in a braggadocious way, but this boat and the lifestyle we lead is very much emblematic or symbolic of the success that I've been blessed with so far. So be your authentic self. Whatever it is in your life that you've done, own it, right? And use it. Don't, there's a difference between egotistical marketing and kind of, this is what I've done, right? So don't be ashamed. Say, this is the success I've had.
Yeah. And part of that is, and I teach this in Get Magnetic Messaging, because a lot of people are so humble and they're so afraid of coming across as being a bragger that they really hold back those credibility elements that actually cause people to choose you. And what you just said is a way of showcasing your credibility without being over the top, showing every picture of you on a private plane and,
right.
The castle that you bought in the middle of Malibu, it's okay, cool. And this is your real life. And it's part of your brand. It's part of who you are. It's your authenticity.
There are, when you and I first connected way back when, you had success connections, you grew a 7-figure consulting empire, right? And I thought that's really cool, because I was starting to get into coaching way, way back then. I said, and I was looking to people like you and Adam and other people who were really doing it well. And you talked about your lifestyle is driven by going to spas and different places like that. And what I connected with that before I knew you personally is that if this person can do that, they have a 7-figure business and they go to all these different spas, they're really living the lifestyle that I would like to live.
Yeah.
And so you're sharing your experience and not going, I'm here, who's working today? Not like that, but you're sharing your true authentic self. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's flip the mic for a minute and talk about you as the show host. We've talked about a few things that, we look for when booking a guest. What I really want to leave people with is not only is podcast guesting a valuable strategy to attract clients, open up the door to more opportunities, but it's a way of positioning your brand and creating buzz around your brand. But you got to get on shows, right? You got to get on the right shows. What is one important thing you look for? Because you said you get a lot of pitches, like I get a lot of pitches. What are you looking for to get someone booked?
It's so reactive now because I'm going into my 9th year, but I'll see this and I go, you know what? 2 months ago, I interviewed somebody about this business structure. 3 months ago, I interviewed somebody about, rent to own or real estate or whatever comes across my desk. I think, when is the last time I interviewed on that? Now, there's only so much, and then the very next thought that I have is, will my audience find value in this? Because there may be a lot of value in how to, buy apartment buildings, but that's really not who my audience is. I work with entrepreneurs and small business owners, usually kind of the early stage of their business, growing, hitting the first 6 figures, growing to multiple 6 figures, multiple streams of revenue. That's my sweet spot, right? So somebody that's in that part of their entrepreneurial journey is not necessarily looking for how to buy an island or, all the things that may be semi-interesting. So I'm totally focused on my guests. It doesn't have to be all about marketing. It doesn't have to be about retention. It doesn't have to be about multiple streams of revenue. But if I see somebody who's accomplished something in their life, even if it's a little outside of my normal area, I will take that interview right straight to their entrepreneurial journey. So I've interviewed people who have, done well in stock market and just different things like that. Again, it's outside of my area, but I'm like, tell me. So I'm curious, did you go to school for this? Did you become an accountant and find that boring and go do this? Was your mom or dad or grandparents an entrepreneur? Are you a first generation entrepreneur? Well, how scary was that when you quit your job? I'm interested in those things. So again, it's not so much what they do, but who they are. See how I came back to that.
Yes.
So those stories, I think, when I think of people, and I this may date myself, but you're driving in the car and you go to hit the button to change the channel. Now it's like you're just clicking on your podcast, but it's like the longer I can keep somebody listening to my show by keeping the conversation interesting and relevant to what the challenges are and the accomplishments and adversities that somebody might be going through, despite what they do, I think that would be a great guest.
All right, 2 things. One, if you've been following along the series, you just picked up on a word that we've heard several times, and that's relevance.
Yeah.
You really need to understand the relevance of your message to the show that you're pitching yourself to, the show you're showcasing yourself to. Because if you are not relevant, you will not be remembered.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, I'm still stuck on, did you actually get picked or pitched from somebody who teaches how to buy islands? Like, was that a real thing or did you make that up?
I probably made that up, but I do get pitched. But I do get
brilliant.
But I do get pitched. Sometimes my brain works faster than my mouth will keep up. But I do get pitched from people who present themselves as having extraordinary success.
Yeah.
And I think that might be a good story. And then I'll go look at their Facebook and I'll thinking, oh
You're
my
like,
gosh,
yeah, that's not real.
yeah, they're talking right now about how their push lawnmower is broken and they got to fix it and they're cutting their own grass. Well, how does somebody have their own island or their own jet and they're cutting their lawn with a broken down lawnmower? So there's a disconnect there, right? Yeah, I'm thinking, totally. I don't want to discover that in the middle of my interview.
Yeah.
So with all due respect, it's not a topic I need to do right now. And I'm not going to, yeah.
I don't know. So if somebody's got a topic on how to buy an island and maybe turn it into a retreat center, I might be interested in that someday.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Jim, I know that you actively get yourself out on podcasts as a guest. You're an amazing guest. You're actually the first guest for my second podcast, Amplify Your Success, which I was so excited to feature you on. And what is a topic you're really passionate about sharing with podcasters right now?
It really, so I don't want to use the word mindset, but right now, as you and I are doing this, and if people are watching this years from now on some replay, it's the COVID, it's the economy, it's no travel, there's no live events, it's riots. There's just so much stuff going on. Yeah. I did an interview with somebody just 2 weeks ago, and the topic I gave them, because they wanted a really cool name, and I said, it's called Staying in Your Lane. And so to the degree and so I'm going to give you a strategy, but this is also as I interview people, because I think that's what you wanted me to say, right? Who would be a great guest or how to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
How are you continuing to either survive or build your business during these times? Because trust me, I went through 2008, 2011. I was broke. I had cancer. I mean, I've been through some crap. So this will pass. But you can't just hide and wait for it to pass. You have to find a way to stay relevant and serve. So to the people that, if somebody just started a business 30 days ago, probably not going to be on my program. No offense. Come back in a year. Tell me about your journey. To the people right now who are finding different ways, and I don't want to use this word, but I can't think of another one, to pivot or, to find different ways to keep going. And the third part of that is to the people that can stay in their lane. And what I mean by that is if people know me, as a marketer, as a newsletter guy, retention, I'm great with brands, dream business coach, all that. So if I was to take that message that I've worked really hard for 20 years now to build, and now when people go check out my social media and I'm getting on my soapbox about this guy sucks and this decision out of the Supreme Court is horrific and this is not fair, I don't think anybody tunes in to see what newscaster Jim Palmer or opinionated Jim Palmer has to say. So I'm encouraging people to stay in your lane, because when this does pass, this meaning everything, when we get to a better place, you will either have worked, preserved, or built on your reputation, or you will have done great harm to it by trying to getting outside your lane. That's my short answer on that.
So I think what I heard you just say is you can overly course correct to try to tap into relevance and lose your core message and your core brand in the process. So there's always this, yes, we want to stay relevant, but you have to stay integrated to your authentic message and your brand. So I love that tip, Jim. If somebody wanted to reach out and connect with you or book you to come onto their podcast, because hey, why not? You're right here, being you. What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
GetJimPalmer.com is my home base. My email is jim@getjimpalmer.com. And all the links, the other websites, my books, everything's at getjimpalmer.com. I always mention now, just if you're curious, this is not like my secret way to get you, and I'll funnel you back in. If you're curious about this lifestyle, Stephanie and I started a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, just search out Our Floating Home, and we shoot videos. You can see my boat, a tour, and we travel up and down, and it's really hard work shooting videos, so we've only got 25 of them up there. But if you're just curious about what the heck this is like floating up and down the East Coast, ourfloatinghome.com at YouTube.
I put that in the chat for you. Yeah, it's so fun to watch your adventures and to see. Literally, Jim and I were in a mastermind for many years together, and you always had the dream. You always had the dream to have more of a boat lifestyle. And I remember the moment you decided. I remember that, it was a big decision, and you stayed true to the commitment to this dream, and everything shifted to support it. So congratulations.
And just very quickly, do I have time for one short story or not?
We have 20 seconds. No.
Okay, 20 seconds. No. So one of the things I learned about just saying yes, which was my 7th book, was that everything we're saying yes to now for this lifestyle, driving this boat in the ocean for the first time when we're rocking and rolling like a cork in a washing machine, doing all these different things, helped me come alive again. Because for the last, say, 4 or 5 years, while you and I were together in masterminds and things are going really well for me, I think I got a little safe zone. Mm-hmm. And now to do this, I came alive, and I think it actually re-emerged or reawoke my entrepreneurial spirit as much, because being an entrepreneur is scary stuff too. So, just staying at home, coming up that same saddle drive to the same driveway for another 6 or 10 or 12 years was not in the cards for us. And we just wanted to do something fun and have a big adventure while I still work.
Captain Jim Palmer, Dream Business Radio, Dream Business Academy. Thanks so much for joining us. If you want to book a great guest who really does live a dream lifestyle and run a business from a boat, Jim, you are such a powerful guest on so many topics. So thanks, my friend, for joining
Melanie.
in today.
I'll chat with you later.
All right. We'll be catching up soon. So before I bring up my next guest, wasn't that awesome? I love when people from the guesting side, Jib's been on both sides of the mic, but really being able to share what's possible when you podcast guest. And I remember when he would go out and do the podcast blitz, and he was just, it was like he was attracting people. He was turning hosts into clients. I remember one of his big success stories was somebody that was a guest on his podcast. You just never know what is going to unfold. Part of this is about just getting more visible, getting your message so fine-tuned, so powerful, so clear that you bring that fire into all the marketing, into all the places you share your message. I'm going to be talking about how to pull all these pieces together to really create a magnetic message that enrolls your ideal clients through podcast guesting, getting on guest expert stages. I'm doing a masterclass next week. You are invited. I'm waiving the investment to join in at melaniebenson.com/podcast-masterclass. I'm going to be sharing some tips on our next break, but we've got another amazing guest joining in. It's the fabulous Deb Coleman. Hi, Deb.
Hi, Melanie. So good to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. So Deb and I have a really special relationship. I've known her for many years. We're both serve on the Women Speakers Association executive team. And one of the things about Deb is I got to know Deb as a member of Amplify Your Success Mastermind. And Deb had so much magic, so much power, so many exciting things. And she joined Get Magnetic Messaging to really help her shape her topic and her talking points. So Deb, I want to share what it's been like. And I know you've got some great tips for people who are guesting on podcasts. I'm going to pull some golden nuggets out of you. And we're just going to pick your brain today about how people can use your content conversion code. And, but first, I just want to talk a little bit about what you discovered along the way as you learned through the magnetic messaging system, how to shape your content, and how's that impacting you now?
Where to begin? There's so many things that I learned by being in the program. I'm someone who usually takes the leap and says yes. So I said yes to podcasts a while ago, years ago, and did get a lot of benefits from doing that, but really hadn't cracked the conversion code when it comes to podcasts without Get Magnetic Messaging, which helped me really apply a lot of my own practices, but to the podcast guesting to really shape the talk that people need and want to hear and make it captivating and use the strategies both before you get to the podcast, during and after to really maximize that as a way to get new leads and new relationships and greater visibility.
Yeah. So when you go out and guest on other people's podcasts, what are a couple of your goals that you want to get out of it?
I'd love to always be able to deliver value to the audience. I mean, I think that's true of all of us, but really want to create an experience for them that's memorable and that they can hopefully get to tie me to that experience of gaining some value and to lead them to where they can learn more about me, connect with me, become a subscriber, become someone who's in my world on social media and just in the online world, and open more doors for all of us when we come into that space together.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was really excited for with you was when we went through Get Magnetic Messaging, you started to really see the power of what I call bold influence formulas. Now, I think there's two layers that happen for people when they discover the power of their formula. And I didn't ask you this in advance, so hopefully you're okay sharing this. Can you share a little bit about what happened for you when you learned how to organize your own teaching into a formula and deliver it that way?
Well, it's easier for me to convey more concisely and memorably, and to really give more shape to my podcast interview. So I was making one of the 17 mistakes that you tell us about. I'm sure a lot more than one, but we'll just start there for now. And winging it to some extent. I'm an early adopter. When Periscope came out, I said, sure, I'll do that. This is fun. It's a great way to meet people and create relationships. And that's all true. And the same is true for saying yes to podcasts before you're fully ready, and to be in the moment while on them. There's definitely a lot of value to that. But like anything else we do in business, without more strategy around not just the delivery, but what's going to happen after the podcast, how you're going to capture leads, how you're going to really convert that experience to something more meaningful in your business. That's all what I got out of Get Magnetic Messaging. So my message, the core of my message didn't really change, but the positioning of it did.
Yes. Say more about that, because I think this is a really powerful moment when you understand what you just said.
I always talked about conversion and the strategy behind our content. I mean, that's my thing from day one.
Yeah.
But I didn't give it a formula. I didn't give it a shape. I didn't have a lot of stories just right off the cuff that I could share that demonstrated it. Get Magnetic Messaging really pushed me to go deeper into my own content and find those. They were there all along, but they were not part of all of my podcast guesting and my other content. So the secondary gift from being in the program was what applies to what we do in our content that's on a podcast applies to all of our content.
Yeah.
So I've taken all the lessons learned and woven them into my social media, my website, my bios, everything, because it's all interconnected. And having better conversion through a podcast is really parallel to having conversion through our own other content means.
I'm really glad you said that too. And I think that's what happens for people. And I think sometimes it's unconsciously holding people back from having the confidence to go get out there on more podcasts. Is there's a part of them that's like, I don't really know how to structure what I'm going to say. And I get confused about how to organize it, or I don't really know what the right topic is. And so they don't do anything. And I think not doing anything keeps them invisible. And when you're invisible, you're not building your list. You're not getting yourself prepared to really thrive in that next launch. And it's a lot more work to make those sales.
Absolutely. And it really is about spicing it up, right? I mean, there are plenty of podcast interviews about the things that I talk about, but no one's going to do it the way that I do it. And I need to be prepared to make it that memorable, to not just say, first you do A, then you do B, then you, like, they can get that anywhere. And as I think a number of your guests said in the series, you know, if you can Google it, it's not that interesting. You know, people are not going to tune into a podcast. But if you can make it fun, if you can bring you into the conversation and make sure that you remember the listener.
Oh, Deb, we kind of lost you there for a second. Say that last piece again.
I know. Sorry, that when we really need to remember that the listener and bring them into the conversation. That's why we're doing this. Like, sure, we want to build our list. Sure, we want to get on other podcasts, meet new people, get new relationships, but we want to deliver to that person on the other end of the content. And that's what I learned in Get Magnetic Messaging, is how to really spice it up a little bit, bring the energy to your talk. I hope I'm checking those boxes, because that's really, they can get this information plenty of other places. Yeah. I want to have my own spin on it.
Yeah. Okay. So I want you to share a little bit about how your content conversion code works for someone who's out podcast guesting. And you learned something in Get Magnetic messaging that you ran with and had so much fun with it. It's really, I think it's going to make your podcast guesting have that extra fire and passion that you're talking about. And that was the showstoppers. You came up with your little catchphrases. So tell us about one of your showstoppers and how it might apply to a podcast guest as they're trying to unlock their own content conversion code.
Okay. And funny, because I've been listening to this whole series, so I've loved everything and really thought a lot about what I do in my own work about content, which is more broad than podcasting, really completely applies to what you do on a podcast interview and after the interview. And so one of my things that I like to talk about is the content hamster wheel, the content creation hamster wheel. And a lot of business owners would be doing this with their content, with their blogs, with their emails, and perhaps with their podcast guesting, where you just have the canned talk, you have the script, you do the same thing every time you're on. You write the email to your list every week. You create the blog every week because you have to. You're just on that wheel, cranking it out and losing the things that really lead to conversion. So my 4C formula applies to podcasts as much as it does to everything else that we do. And it's really about clarity, number one, not just in your message and the language that you use, which is critical, but also in your intention. What do you want to have happen by being on a podcast? So after clarity, you have to make that connection. The second C is connection, and have an emotional connection with the people on the other end of the content, the listeners in the case of the podcast, those tuning in, those consuming what you're sharing. Thirdly, you have to have consistency. And this is where a lot of business owners and podcast guests fall down, that it's not enough to do one or two and just kind of, stop there and think that that can do it for you. You need to keep showing up. You need to be consistent in that message on the podcast, that it aligns with how you show up online everywhere else. And those 3 C's will lead to conversion when you do them properly and you have a plan and you have a strategy. And the same is true for what you do with your podcast on either side of the mic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Is really you can do this on both sides of the mic. And one of the things I actually look for before I agree to be on someone's podcast now is, are they doing these 4 C's? Are they creating exposure for their guests? Because otherwise, and there are some shows that they get all their traction just from their followers on Apple Podcast or Spotify or whatever. And that's a real talent, by the way. Most of us are working very hard to create exposure in multiple platforms. If you're going to guest on a show, pay attention. Where are they getting their traction from? Where are they getting people to watch their content? Now, Deb, when somebody guests on a podcast, I know I have a whole system I teach on what you should do with it, but is there anything that you've been doing that you've noticed really helps get more traction with your appearance on someone else's show?
Absolutely. And some of this I've just done probably naturally, because I am a natural connector, and I really want to have and maintain and nurture relationships. So I tend to share people's content that I value and I know my audience will value. But I also learned a lot through Get Magnetic messaging about how to make some of those connections before you get asked to be on the podcast that you want to be on, and how to make it real, how to be authentic. I mean, no one teaches how to be authentic because you either are or you aren't. Sorry, but that's the bottom line. I haven't
seen a class on authenticity, right? Like,
yeah. Well, there are people out there trying, but
yes.
But you have it or you don't. You either really want to show up how you are or you don't. And that then once the episode airs, like, I'm so excited when the podcast episode I'm on is set to air. I will go looking for it. And when that email comes, one of the mistakes a lot of people make is they share it. that day, maybe that week. And it's kind of that one trick pony of content that I talk about with all content. And it's kind of one and done. And there's gold in those podcast interviews. And if you're positioning them properly, they should be evergreen. The message should be relevant for the long haul. So what I like to do is certainly share it in the moment, also tag the host, use their hashtag if they have a hashtag for their podcast on social media. Say something about it that makes people want to click. It's not like, here's my latest podcast episode, boring, I mean, it's remarkable how many people do that, but tell them why they should tune in. I love talking with Melanie about this, or do you have a one trick pony in your content? Then you share the link. And then beyond that, as you know, Melanie, because I know you're a master at this, that you write a blog post about it, and now it becomes on your website in more places than just your media page. And then you email it to your list. It's outstanding content that actually someone pulled out of you. and it also, taps into their audience, some of the obvious things. And then when you use it on social media, you want to evergreen it. You want it to show up over and over. I still share podcast episodes I did with you on Amplify Your Success, with Women's Speakers Association. I was on Amory Crosses, who I know was another one of your guests this week. Well, she's my first one. She was my first, sure, I'll do that, when she asked me. And that still gets circulated because the message is still relevant.
So, Deb, you've just delivered so many golden nuggets. I want to take a step back and unpack a couple of these. And these are writer downers, as you said yesterday. First of all, Deb said something that this may be the game changer for someone listening in. I'm going to actually encourage you to write this down, and that is just say yes. So one of the things I love and adore about you, Deb, is even if you're a little uncomfortable, and I know in our coaching, I have pushed you several times to do things you're like, oh, I don't know. But when you said yes, you found there was a massive value on the other side. When you say yes, what happens is the part of you that keeps you from being visible disappears, and you now realize you're preparing to be visible, and you will rise to become ready for the challenge. And if you don't say yes, you can't get seen. If you don't say yes, you will not get the opportunity. So say yes, and then get the support you need to figure out how to do it. And Get Magnetic Messaging is there to help you with that, if that is, what you need to be able to say yes. The second thing, I love your 4C formula. And the piece that you start talking about with this reoccurring, this is part of what I really consider turns an evergreen podcast. Because look, once the podcast goes live, it's there forever, unless somebody goes to the trouble to take the show down, which none of us have ever done. So that is evergreen advertisement for you, working 24/7 to bring you visibility and leads if you've done a good job. And Deb, when you nurture it that way and you keep it in your social media rotation, and I don't know if we've actually talked about this or if you've heard me say this, but I know you know this, what you're doing is way more than just like, hey, look at me, I'm great on this podcast. You're actually waking up your dormant social media following to pay attention. And that might be the exact message they need to hear the 10th, the 15th, the 30th time it crosses their social media stream. And they go, oh, she's talking to me. Oh, that message was for me today. And that, Deb, I think is such an important piece of what you teach with the content conversion code, is not just to fall into this one trick pony mindset. It's been amazing how many podcasters have been in this series and this has come up and they go, shoot, I'm not doing that. Okay, I'm going to do that now. So thank you for sharing that.
You're so welcome. And it's so true that I love to say yes. In fact, my first say yes that it still holds true in my business today was how I became a hot dog truck driver. And I know you know the story, which is it's a great thing to have at the ready when people say, tell me something people might not know about you. Well, yeah. I keep talking about it, so they will. But that was really probably one of my first say yeses. And how do I, as a 17-year-old, drive a hot dog truck? Well, the guy across the street buys a hot dog truck, and he doesn't have time to drive it or do that part of the business. And he looks around, and I'm probably the oldest one on the street who could drive, that was still young enough to want to do something like that. So I said yes. And that's why I say yes to Periscope when it came up. That's why I say yes when I was asked to be on a podcast before I really had a talk. And that is how I've gotten to do everything that I've done in my business. You know, I write ad copy for top influencers on Facebook and Instagram, not because I learned how to do that, but because someone asked me to do it. I thought, I don't have that background. But when you have the strategy mindset, you can apply it to a lot of different things. So it is about saying yes, and it is about stepping in. And like you said, getting the resources you need to make it better as you go forward, and not just stay stuck on that hamster wheel.
Yeah. So in what I'm hearing is driving a hot dog truck was your first yes to great visibility. Because look, if you're driving a hot dog truck, you're massively visible, right? You're like,
totally.
Didn't really know this was going to be the way I go about getting visible out there in the world, but I love that.
Exactly.
Okay, now pause to our listeners. That was a extraordinary example of a showstopper. And when you learn how to weave showstoppers into your messaging and into the conversation so naturally, because Deb, you like pulled that one out and like, bing, you know, I drove a hot dog truck, but it's so catchy. It's so, it's so interesting. It creates a state interrupt. And so I just want to unpack this for our listeners for a second to really understand the value of a showstopper. When you have a showstopper, the point is you're moving people out of that lull that's easy for them to move into as a passive listener. Especially on podcasts when there's not a visual component, they're not seeing you speak on stage. Those still work on stages. They still work in video, and in podcasting when it's only audio, those state interrupts get people out of that passive lull and go, oh, whoa, what was that? She drove a hot dog truck? Wait, I got to hear this. And it causes people to A, remember you, B, stop the other things they're doing, lean in and start to get enrolled in more. And that's what we really want. That's one of the little, I don't want to call it a hack. It's not a hack. It's a strategy of how we get people to stop being complacent, to bond with us, and to really lean in and go, hey, how do I get more from this person? Which is what gets them out of the community of podcasters and onto your list and hopefully hiring you. So thanks for showcasing that, Deb.
You're welcome.
People are using these techniques so I can really demonstrate what's working. And it makes for such an interesting conversation.
Thank you. It's fun, and I think that what we do in our business should be fun, much like Justin talked about yesterday in the series, is that you have to bring the fun, to your work, to your interviews, to your experiences. Otherwise, it can be a drag. It's not always easy, and it's a lot about our approach to it. So
true. So, Deb, having gone through Get Magnetic Messaging and having your own journey with getting yourself booked on podcasts, if somebody wanted to start and maybe they were feeling uncomfortable, they were holding themselves back because they didn't feel like they had it all figured out, besides the fact that they could join Get Magnetic Messaging and get the process, we'll put that aside for a minute. What would be one piece of advice you could give somebody that would help them tap into and unlock the power of podcast guesting?
I think first, we need to envision ourselves in that place. We need to allow ourselves to be that person that's getting showcased before we feel ready to do that. And that can really go a long way to inspire you to think, you know what, maybe I can do that too. That looks like, they're having some great success with that. Why can't I? And when we're in business, we all have a message in our business. Those of us who are service-based want to reach more people. If that's you, why would you not want to tap into the power of podcasting to do that? Not just for the listeners who are tuning in when it first airs, but over the long haul, to be able to bring value to people 24/7, wherever they are in the world. whether they're on their walk listening to the podcast or sitting at their laptop taking a break from other things. That's, an amazing opportunity. So what I would say to people is to really allow yourself to listen into this series and think, hey, that could kind of be me if I take a look at that. And then, yes, get the support that you need so that it truly converts and you're not just having fun conversations that go nowhere, but that it really can help you to build your business.
Yeah, well said. Thank you so much for saying that. There's so many things I want to ask you, but I think now would be a great time. You have a great topic that you've been sharing on podcasts. Share what that topic is and how someone could book you to be a guest on their show.
My topic is Crack the Content Conversion Code, 4 simple steps to get new clients fast. And people can reach me at debcoleman.com and pretty much anywhere on social media. It looks like I'm there 24/7, and that's, the way I do my content. And I am there quite a lot of the time. So I'd love to, take it further with anyone who thinks that their audience needs to hear how they can crack the content conversion code.
And let me make sure I got this right. www.debcoleman.com.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm just going to put that in the chat for you. And
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. And I highly recommend that you follow Deb on social media because you're getting a great example of how someone goes about using content to connect with her audience and how she goes about doing that. And Deb, you have great tools and resources. If somebody wanted to learn more about the content conversion code, what would be the best place for them to start on that one?
They could start with a guide that I have that talks a little bit about the content, the content hamster wheel and some of the other mistakes that business owners are making without realizing it. And they can grab that guide and get started on taking a look at their own content and where they can shore it up and power it up to do more to convert.
Excellent. Deb, thanks so much for joining me. I'm so proud of all the accomplishments you've made through Get Magnetic Messaging and the work we're doing together. I really appreciate you sharing that part of your journey. But you are a firecracker. You've got awesome stuff for people to bring onto their podcast. So book Deb, crack the content conversion code. She's an awesome guest and a great sharer, which is what we all want, right?
Thank you.
So,
Thank you
so much, Deb. And I know you'll be around supporting people and connecting, and we love and appreciate you. So see you more soon. All right. Well, as we take a 2-minute pause between Deb and our next guest, I want to take a couple things that Deb said just a little bit deeper. She was talking about some of the big mistakes that people make with their podcast guesting, and she was owning one of hers. It's funny, I had everybody read this free report I built, or this is a guidebook basically, on the 17 mistakes that people are making when they're podcast guesting. And I want to talk about a couple of the big ones, because if you are getting out there and you're guesting on podcasts, great. I want you to do that. But what I found is a lot of people come to me and they say, Melanie, you're always talking about that you're monetizing your guesting, and I'm not. What's missing? So a couple of things that are usually missing. Number one, the most common mistake is you're an expert. You could talk about your content in your sleep, and you're showing up for podcast episodes where you're featured and you're winging it. You don't really have a magnetic structure. And what happens is 9 out of 10 times, these people who are really brilliant and they really know their stuff, they're actually kind of floating around and not making sense. And they start tapping into another mistake, which is what I call being a rambling rose. They're kind of rambling all over the place, telling long-winded stories that don't really have a point, and you're losing the energy and the momentum with the listener. So that is a really common mistake. I get why people do it, but I always say this: if you would prep to get on Oprah's couch and sit across from her and really nail your talking points, you should prep for a podcast interview. It is a powerful media opportunity. Just because it's done with a friend or from your home doesn't make it any less valuable. So have a plan, have a system of how you're going to organize what you do so that you're moving people through the golden thread. The thread of here's the topic that I am intriguing you with and making you want to listen to the podcast through talking points that power people up and get them excited to want more, to a call to action that moves them out of that listener environment and into your list and your offer. And if this is all like, wow, Melanie, this is great, but this is something I really struggle with, I want to invite you to my masterclass that I'm doing next week. It's called How to Leverage Podcast Guesting and Virtual Shows to Fill Your Programs and Attract More Opportunity. It's at melaniebenson.com/podcast-masterclass. And I am waiving the fee for this. I want to give you what's working right now, because we are in this unique time in history where so much is happening online. And podcasts are one of the most powerful evergreen forms of visibility. And you need to be tapping into it. So I want to bring up my next fabulous guest. It is David Newman. Welcome, David. Thank you for joining me.
Great to be here.
Well, David, you are a well-known author with the Do It series, and you have your own podcast. Just fill us in real fast. Tell us what your podcast is and what is it about?
Sure. So my podcast is called The Speaking Show. And interestingly, it is not my first podcast, because I had a podcast years ago, did everything wrong, like absolutely everything wrong. Sporadic episodes, no theme. Some shows were 5 minutes. Some shows were 75 minutes. Just every rule of podcasting, broke it. Like most podcasters that start out with no plan and no clue, it lasted 15, 20 episodes. Then I threw in the towel and said, forget it. We've been doing this one for about 2 years, doing it right, which means consistent. Take it seriously. It's a distribution channel for our expertise. It's a lead magnet. It is certainly something to mention when we're a guest. So, for example, thank you for saying, there's a speaking show. This is great. So it's online at thespeakingshow.com, and it's available wherever your fine podcasts are sold. And another fun tip is we just got, because you can submit your podcast, of course, to lots of different places. We just got it onto Spotify. So it's now Spotify. It's on The Cylinder. I can't say her name, but The Cylinder, made by Amazon.com, because otherwise she'll come to life and start talking to me. So the distribution channels, and we just do it consistently. And the focus there of the show is to help consultants and experts and speakers, basically thought-leading professionals, grow their business, build their platform, and have success as a speaking-driven entrepreneur. So we have all kinds of other cool people on that. Melanie, you've been on the show. In fact, you and I were just on an event, and someone said, so Charlie Posnack, who's my COO, had a podcast that went about 400 episodes, and he sends me the link to the podcast where he interviewed you. And I was like, okay, fine. Episode 158. How about that? Melanie Benson, SmackDown. And so we were trading Melanie Benson episodes.
Oh, that's awesome.
And on my show.
I love that. Well, I am all about creating the buzz, and that's one of the things that happens when you podcast guest as a part of your client attraction strategy. You do get that I see you everywhere experience. And I think Charlie was a few years ago, so I'll have to give him a little shout out. So David, you mentioned the power of a podcast being a lead magnet. I want to flip the conversation to your experience as a podcast guest. Yeah. How have you been tapping into podcast guesting, and what are you seeing come out of it?
Well, so the first thing is a true confession. Nowhere near as smart as what you're recommending. Nowhere near as smart as what you're sharing with your clients. So early on, I was completely screwed up in this area as well. I said, it's the host's job to promote the podcast. I'm just the talent. Well, my friends, none of us is just the talent. Just like your book is not going to sell itself if it's on Amazon, your podcast episode is not going to bring you leads unless you actively participate.
Hold on. Mic drop moment. Boom. That was a good one.
Because how many people say, well, let's use the book metaphor for a quick second. Well, my book is on Amazon.
Yeah.
Amazon gets hundreds of millions of visits a day. I'm just going to sit back and let the book sales roll in. And of course, that's not the way to sell a book. No one ever sells a book that way. So just like a great podcast guesting experience, you can't just sit back and, I'm sure that host has a great audience. I'm sure that host is going to socialize it. I'm sure that host is going to promote it, and it's going to be an evergreen asset. Like any other piece of media, by the way. So if you're on TV, if you get quoted in the New York Times, you get quoted in Industry Journal, Association Magazine, whatever, the next day or the next week or maybe the next month, depending if it's a monthly publication, the next month or the next week or the next day, it's wrapping fish. It is dead. It is done. It is over. That publication, that host, that show has moved on. And it's our job to take that media, maximize it, amplify it, microsize it, brag on it, publicize it, socialize it, make every single aspect of it work. And I'll tell you, Melanie, I found this out by accident. I had a guy who was a very humble guy. He said, David, I'm a marketing student, and I just started a podcast. I have no audience. I have no platform. I'm doing this for a class project. Will you be my guest? This was the pitch, right? So I'm like, well, this is unusual. Okay, I'll play along, sure. So early on, there was no show that was too small. There was no request that was too humble. I said, sure, I'll come on. And the guy's intro says, I have a lot of marketing books. I have David Newman's book, Do It Marketing. I have all these other people's book. I asked about a dozen marketing authors. David is the only one who responded and the only one who said yes. And I'm like, dude, you're not doing yourself any favors right now. This is not helping you, and I know it's not helping me. But anyway, he says, we have very few subscribers. I think right now it's me and my mom, and he wasn't kidding.
Oh, my goodness.
I still did the show. I still used the show. I still socialized the show because, depending on how big your audience and how big your list and so forth, sometimes your list is going to be much bigger than the host. And then that you can use that for what Melanie, you were saying, that oh my gosh, I see you everywhere. Is everyone interviewing this guy? Everyone from John Lee Dumas to the guy with his subscriber and his mom, and Melanie Benson and Bob Berg and so on and so forth. So yes, I want to be everywhere, but I need to be an active participant in notifying the world that, hey, I'm everywhere. And of course, it's not really everywhere. It's everywhere where my clients are. It's everywhere where my prospects are. So no one here, and I think, Melanie, one of the genius things about what you teach, you're not telling people to be everywhere. You're telling them to be everywhere that counts. Yes. And I think that's another mic drop moment, is that people who do this for media exposure, or they want to get into the pages of the New York Times or USA Today, that's not going to make you money. Getting into niche publications, niche blogs, niche podcasts, where it's 100% your target market, your target demographic, we call this a profit-rich environment, that's where you should dominate your podcast guesting strategy. And again, that took me quite a long time to figure out. And now that I have it dialed in, I don't want to be everywhere. I just want to be everywhere that the prospects are.
I'm so glad you brought that refinement into the message here, because there's two things going on: everywhere that my clients are, my prospects are, and a relevant message they can hear. The theme today has been relevance. We've had a theme each day. One day it was authenticity, and today it is relevancy. And I think that when you bring those two pieces together, that's what creates that buzz and momentum. It's happening for me right now with this particular topic. And I think when you really understand who that audience is and the message that they need to hear, it's just off the charts. So I'm curious. I know for me, one of my experiences of somebody reaching out, I figured out after the podcast had aired that I was like in the first 3 that they'd ever done, but I actually got clients from that episode. And it taught me a really powerful lesson. Just because somebody is new at podcasting doesn't mean they don't know how to market their podcast. And I think I get a question a lot, David, and maybe you hear this too, or you look at this. How do I know which podcasts to say yes to, which ones to say no to? What's your trick for discerning through who you're going to say yes to as a guest?
Well, I think this is, so I'll answer that question, but the answer has evolved.
Sure.
So early on, it was anywhere, anytime, just to practice being a guest, to practice my spiel, just to kind of get comfortable being a podcast guest. Then, of course, once your calendar starts to fill up, you've got client work, you've got marketing work, you're managing a team, you're doing all kinds of other things, and your time is really at a premium. Now you have to get a little bit more selective.
Yes.
And you have to get a little bit more targeted and more relevant. So that what you just said is totally that's the crosshairs, right? Does this podcast have my audience? Just like when we're doing joint ventures, we're doing summits, we're doing all kinds of other things. The question you want to ask yourself is, who else already has the attention of my prospect? Who already has them on their list? Who already has them as a client? Who already has them as a customer? Who already has their bandwidth and attention in their email inbox? For a podcast, it's who already has my listener as the prospect, right? My prospect as their listener. So I will do a competitive scan, right? I will see kind of who's on whose show. And I think that's a source of competitive intelligence that's important. But I will also, and I think you mentioned this in the training that I sat in on, so many people don't do this. You have to listen to the show. You have to listen to the show because it might not be your style. It might not be, they may be like goofy, flaky, kind of take the interviews in a whole different direction where you don't want to play there. If it's the wrong audience or the wrong come from, meaning that their attitude, their perspective just doesn't jibe with who you are and what you want, that's a huge, huge clue. And when people come on my show, on the other side of it as a host, I'm looking for the same sorts of things, right? Relevance. Have they listened to an episode? Do they kind of fit? It's like the old Sesame Street children's thing about one of these things doesn't belong, and you don't want to be that guest who doesn't belong. And then as a host, you don't want to have that episode where you're like, why did I ever agree to talk to this person?
I have that happen once in a while. And actually, I've had it happen with really big name experts. And I'm like, where are you going with this conversation? Like, this is so not what I thought we were going to do.
Well, and you also said something really profound that I want to just flip on its head. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes the really big names, they have so many other things they're marketing that they undermarket and underpromote their podcast. Yeah.
They make
so again, don't think that you're on some big name guru's show and that's going to be your ticket to Hollywood. They're promoting their big launch. They're doing their $5,000 coaching program. They're selling their $50,000 retreat. You might be in a promotion window where the podcast doesn't even get mentioned.
Yep.
But that's okay because guess what? With what Melanie teaches, you are in charge of marketing all the episodes that you are a guest on.
Yeah. We have a thing, at least in my podcasting circles, where we call them the celebrity factor. Sometimes it's nice to bring kind of that celebrity name energy into the podcast to add some extra credibility. But we're like, if we get some promotion from them and their team, that'll be awesome.
Right.
But I will say, as a podcast guest who's pitching to get on really big name shows, don't say you're going to share it and then don't. Be upfront. Like, hey, we'll decide if we think your topic is worth it or not. But just, it just kind of it erodes that trust and that connection. And I think one of the things that every single person I featured in this series has said is there's something really powerful that gets amplified when you show up and deliver value and really connect with the host. And all of a sudden, all these other things, like David, how many things are starting to come unpacked for us because you invited me to your show a while back and we've been on each other's radar in a new way, right? And so you never know what's going to happen, but that integrity has to stay there. I will say, I know I'm alone. Not everybody feels the way I do, but I get a little perturbed when people are like, yeah, I'll do this, I'll do that. And then they're like, poof, nothing. I'm like, okay, I see how this is going to go. So David, you were bringing up, your podcast and what you tend to look for. What do you think are the top 2 factors that would get someone who's got an exciting topic for your community booked on your show that you don't know already?
Sure. Well, and you also mentioned this in the training that I sat in on about I get pitched a lot by these podcast agencies, and they send me these gigantic long emails and 3 attachments, and here's her PDF, and here's 3 episodes that she was on. And, you know, most successful podcast hosts are also most successful entrepreneurs. They're busy. I will respond to a 4-line pitch. So it's like, here's the person, here's their thing. But I'll tell you, the thing, and a couple of people have done this now that are really super savvy, and I like it. It's sort of changing my approach. David, I listened to the episode with Melanie Benson. I loved what she said about, and then put the nugget in there so they really did listen to Melanie's episode. I really enjoy your show. I left you a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I would love to come on the show and talk about either bullet, or bullet. Do you think that's a fit for your audience? Now, that question in and of itself is marketing genius.
Yep.
They're not saying, look at me, I'm great, I'm awesome.
Yeah.
Here's my podcast guest sheet. Here's me. Here's my credentials. Here's me on LinkedIn. They're talking to the thing that's the most important thing to me, which is my listeners. Do you think one of these would be a great fit for your listeners? This person in that 4-line email has indicated to me they're serious. They've done their homework. They've listened to at least 1 episode, the best episode, obviously the one with Melanie. They have a specific request, and they have been of service to me before ever asking if I can be of service to them, or, you know, vice versa. So they gave me a review, which generally is a 5-star review with some nice words in it. And now it's like, wow, A, this person has done their homework. B, they've already done me a favor. C, I think one of these topics would be really interesting. At this point, I'm not even looking. Is this person a rock star? Is this person a genius? Have they been on 30 other shows? I am already inclined to say yes before I do my research. And I do a little bit of research, and I say, well, this person looks cool. They look like there's a fun story. I go to the website. I go to LinkedIn. If they have a podcast, I'll, tune in and kind of listen or skim through an episode or 2. And it's like a 20-minute process. And then my answer to this person, Melanie, is that was the easiest yes of the week. Yeah. I would love to have you on the show. Here's where to schedule our time. And they send me a 4-sentence email. I send them a 3-sentence email. They've proven they have integrity. They have smarts. They've done their homework. And I love to have guests like that on the show.
Oh my God, that was pure gold. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because simple is better. Simple is better. And I am not a huge fan of the podcast pitching, organizations. Like, I know they have value, and a lot of people believe they don't have time for this. But if they are going to pitch for you, they've got to make sure they're doing that kind of work on your behalf. Otherwise, I'm like, I can tell who's really like not too excited to be on the show because someone else pitched them and they're like, why am I here? One time, David, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. I had a guest who was an author, really big name. This was in my previous podcast, which I did all wrong as well. And the guy had been pitched like 3 months earlier, accepted, but we couldn't book for 3 months. By the time he got there, he wasn't working with the organization anymore, and he'd forgotten why he got on the show. I'm like, can you seem any less interested in being here? So you really, like, you are being given a gift to be on a show. Be a valuable guest. Be invested in delivering massive value. So David, I could talk to you forever because you have so many great tips and insights. Let's take it back to you being a guest for a minute. What is one of your favorite topics to get booked on other people's shows right now?
Well, obviously with COVID-19 and all the disruption in the speaking and consulting and training business, it is how to COVID-proof your expert business. What should smart experts, consultants, coaches, trainers, and speakers do to move their business online, to have a hybrid business with multiple investable opportunities? In-person is going to come back, but obviously there's some things that we need to do online that maybe back in February or March of 2020, people thought, oh, this will blow over. Oh, this will be a few months. It's not going to be a few months. It's going to be at least a year and probably more than that until any semblance of live in-person speaking, conferences, events, meetings, training ever happens. And a lot of people are left high and dry. They say, hey, I've had a $60,000 a month keynote business. That went to zero back in March. I've had a $30,000 a month training business. That went to zero back in March. How do you do COVID-19 marketing, COVID-19 messaging, and COVID-19 selling as an expert who depends on or used to depend on face-to-face live events to generate a living? So I'm doing a lot with that. One of my favorite little sound bites is, so many people are busy building a home studio. They should be building a remote business.
I love that. I saw you post that on social media the other day. I was like, boom, that's
That's
good
one of my little hooks
one-liner.
in the podcast.
That's a
guesting world.
showstopper. That's what we call a showstopper in the podcasting side. So how could someone book you? Is there an email, website? What
well, they can certainly pop over to doitmarketing.com. That's the main website. My email is super simple. It's David, my first name, David, David at doitmarketing.com. And I'm easy to impress if you put a little effort in. And I'd love to be a guest and add value to your listeners on your show as well, everybody. So feel free to email me on either side of that equation if you want to be on my show or vice versa.
Oh, thank you, David. I mean, you have a great energy you bring to your podcast, and it's one of my favorite shows. So well done, you.
Thank you.
We could go on forever and ever, but I would love to kind of bring home, like, if you could share a hard-earned lesson about getting on podcasts and getting, as we were talking about in that training the other day, how to get a return on investment from your guesting on podcasts. What advice would you give our listeners today?
Well, it's really similar to our book analogy from before. People think that writing the book or publishing the book is the hard part, and it's marketing the book and what you do with the book. So just take out the word book. Let's put in the word podcast. Everyone thinks getting on the show is the hard part. It is what you do with the show after it is done that will determine whether that is a high value, high ROI activity. So don't worry about getting the gig as a guest. Really have a solid strategy, and everything Melanie teaches in her program is so valuable for this. Get the right gigs, but then know how to multiply and amplify and monetize every single podcast opportunity. So it's not about getting the gig. It's what do you do with the gig after you got it.
Yeah. And you were alluding to this earlier that you felt like you really had some ahas. Is there anything you're doing differently, even after the training we had the other day?
Yeah.
Well, you learned along the way?
Totally. So we're doing two things differently based on your training. And thank you again. That was genius. And I'm so glad I was in that audience. Number one is I realized that on our media page, we only have some of the podcasts that we're a guest on, not all. There's 10 more podcasts that are going to go on there. And then social sharing, if I looked at our social media sharing on Facebook and LinkedIn, if you have a show, of course, your bias is, let's promote my episode with Melanie. Let's promote my episode with Bob Berg. Let's promote my episode with Jeffrey Gitomer. I need to promote where I'm a guest even more. Listen to this, even more than the shows that we produce our show. Because someone's like, yeah, Newman has a show. That's one messaging stream, not that important. Man, this Newman guy, everyone loves this guy. Everyone wants him on their show. That's important.
Yes. I'm so glad to hear this, because I feel like so many big name people are missing out on this one piece. I really believe it wakes up your dormant social media followers, because many of us have thousands of people that are just hanging out in the dark. They're not doing anything. And this is a great way to reactivate them, reconnect with them, and awaken this desire to want something from you. I personally had that happen in my own business, and I'm excited to see what happens for you with you guys using the strategy. And hopefully we're going to get you on Amplify Your Success real soon, and we can put Amplify Your Success in your new strategy. Woohoo!
That's a date, my friend. Absolutely.
David, thank you so much for bringing all this great wisdom. If we could leave people with like where the best way to reach out to find out about what you're doing right now, I know they can go to doitmarketing.com, but anything special you want to share with them?
Sure. Well, we have a live event coming up, and obviously, depending on when you watch this, that live event might be before, during, after, but certainly we're live now. So I'll share what that is. It's called Expert Profit Formula Live, EPFlive.com. And that's new and cool and exciting. And Melanie, like you said, all kinds of resources, goodies, download, podcast, blog are online at doitmarketing.com. And those are there all the time, just waiting for folks to dive in and enjoy.
Yay. All right. Well, you and I have a catch up coming. Thank you so much for being here. You over delivered awesomeness. Always happy to share your work with our community. And as David has said, getting on podcasts is really great, but you're going to have to learn the system to ROI it. And you want to put that in your own hands. So David, I'm so glad you brought that up. Another great takeaway from David's session today was a very simple and profoundly powerful pitch script. If you missed that part, you definitely want to rewind about halfway and pick that up. That is pure gold right there. Absolutely will work. And another one of my great takeaways is be everywhere that your clients are. You don't want to be everywhere. You want to be everywhere your clients are. Get on more podcasts. Make sure they're tuned into the community that you want to serve. So we'll, I'm sure, pick up some more really great golden nuggets out of today's session, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
And as you're listening in, before we bring up that next guest, I'm going to cover some more tips and invite you to my masterclass that's happening next week. If you go to melaniebenson.com/podcast-masterclass, a little bit of a tongue twister there. You can get a free ticket to my online training I'm doing about how to leverage podcasts and virtual events to fill your programs, create buzz around your brand, and get more opportunities coming your way. Now, I get asked a lot about this thing that David was referring to. And he alluded to a training I did earlier in the week. That was a power-packed training on how to leverage podcast guesting to get unique lead sources into your business. And one of the things that was so popular with the group was my technique of how to turn a podcast episode you've been featured in into your 24/7 sales force. Now, I will unpack this in greater detail on the training next week. But David started talking about it, and I thought it would be worth just going a little bit deeper here on one of these components. When you understand the value of third-party endorsement, this unlocks the power of a collaborative environment. So you can do that with joint ventures. You can do that with somebody hosting you on a webinar. But one of the easiest and least expensive and most organic ways to do it is to get on people's podcasts who serve your target audience. I always talk about it. In fact, I did a podcast episode on this recently. Like, you can literally turn your competition, people who do very similar things as you do, into your number one lead source by getting on their podcast. Now, three things happen. And this is why this is such a powerful strategy. First of all, if you get on the right podcasts, those podcast hosts have cultivated a deep trust and rapport with their audience. And you being a guest on their show means you are borrowing that trust and that credibility from the host. And it is implied on you and your offer, especially if your nature and your character is very similar to the host. Like there's a real synergy there. And what that does is it makes people more likely to get your offering, to buy from you, to go that next step, because you've borrowed that trust and rapport from the host. And it's something that I think a lot of people overlook. And the way to activate that afterwards is get that in your recurring stream. As Deb was talking about, as David was talking about, you can take control of that and continue to nurture that by continuing to keep that going in your social media, to keep sharing that in your all the different places. I teach 5 of those strategies. I'll just talk about social media here because there's a lot to unpack. It's very powerful. And it is one of the best ways to continue to really design rapport and to tap into that rapport that we need to shorten that know, like, and trust nurturing sequence that many of us spend years trying to cultivate with our own audiences. So I love that strategy. I was really glad that David brought it up. It's come up quite a few times throughout this series because it works. And I ran across a statistic, and I believe it was Anne Marie Cross, who we were talking with on the first day. It used to be, there was a stat that 51% of people in the United States who listen to podcasts end up buying something from the guest or the host. That's pretty profound. Now, Anne Marie said that in the 2019, that statistic was updated. It is now 61%. So guess what? That makes podcast guesting a powerful way to get in front of buyers who you don't have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on Facebook ads and marketing strategies. You can invest your time and energy getting onto other people's podcasts and tap into that in a pretty effortless way. Most of these podcasts are under a half hour. Some will go a little bit longer, especially if you're on a good roll. And unless you're paying for a podcast booker, it's relatively inexpensive to do that through your business. So if you want to join me for the masterclass, I would love to have you there. I can answer even more of your questions that come up. Just head over to melaniebenson.com/podcast-masterclass. And I will take you through all the pieces you need to be a great podcast guest who's getting a good ROI from your time and your energy. Well, I've got one more guest joining me today, and I'm really excited to share this friend of mine with you. This is a friend of mine who has just been burning a fire in the podcasting world. Let me bring him up. Hopefully you are ready, Adam.
Hey.
Hi. So glad you could join in.
Thanks,
Adam Lewis Walker, my friends. He is the host of Awaken Your Alpha and Talk X. Right?
All right, yeah.
Talk X. And also, now, I don't know if your title was columnist or what, but you are now part of Podcast Magazine.
Yeah, category director for education.
Category director. All right. All right. So, Adam, you have literally come on the scene and burning a trail behind you. I guess you're what we call a trailblazer. How long have you been podcasting?
About 6.5 years almost. The Awaken Your Alpha launched in April 2014. Yeah, so that's feels like a long time in podcasting.
Yeah,
so,
it really does.
Yeah.
The average lifespan is what, 250 episodes, something like that.
Oh,
So,
I think it's lower than that. I know. I thought it was in the tens or low.
really?
Low.
Oh man.
Yeah, I have
no.
stats for everything. I heard pod fade. Some people have 7 episodes and then kind of fade out, and and then I suppose once you push through, you just keep going, and it's changed, it's evolved. It's it's not easy, but I suppose if I've got anything going, it's consistency on some level. I mean, I created the cardinal sin of I did pause from one season to another when I moved country, but that needed to be done because I started off with too many episodes per week for me anyway. And so it went really good for the podcast, but for me, I had to move country and had other things to do as well, and I was literally just podcasting flat out.
And you know what? When you own your own podcast, you can do that. The key is, don't go dormant, pick it back up, revitalize it. There's strategies for that. And I appreciate your authenticity around that because we all hit that where we're like, are we going to keep going with this or what are we going to do here?
Yeah.
So you have a couple really unique podcasts, one of which you are highlighting people who want to be on TED stages, have been on TED stages. Tell me a little bit more about that particular one. That I love both your podcasts, but this one from the speaking and the expert side of it really has a lot of juice going.
Well, yeah, that's definitely it. Because with Awaken Your Alpha, obviously, 2014 is a different landscape, and it is more of a general podcast. It originally started out as a men's development podcast, so we have a real variety of guests on there. Whereas the Talk Accelerator podcast is very specific, so it's it does what it says on the tin. It's like how to get a TEDx talk. We only interview TEDx speakers and TEDx organizers, and it's very short. It's for 18-minute interviews, like a TEDx talk. And that's all we talk about. We don't veer off onto other stuff. It's very specific. So it's really packed in. And that came out of, with the podcast, Awaken Your Alpha 2014, that launched. 2016, I did a TEDx talk, Awaken Your Alpha. And then 2018, I did the book, Awaken Your Alpha. So there's a theme here. And generally people don't ask me, how do you do a book? For whatever reason. But they have always asked me, how do you do a podcast? How do you do a TEDx talk? Or how did you get that? And always asking about that. So I started, just lightly advising, helping, and it just kept coming up. And I noticed that I was really into that. And it was, the three things that really had an impact in the business sense and getting influence and amplifying it has been them three things. So I started to help people, and I sort of devised this process because I felt what I'd come across in terms of TEDx coaches. There was kind of just the high end, like working with people one-to-one. And I definitely think there's a place for that. But I also think there's certain things and steps that you need to do in getting a TEDx that can be replicated. So instead of me just telling people that over and over again, I created the Talk Accelerator program. And of course, to go with the one-to-one help and small group sort of coaching through that. And then because I'm a podcaster, I thought a unique element would be to, how could I leverage that? So, podcast at that stage, for doing a podcast and launching it, I was already doing it. So it was easier for me at that point. So on the back end, I thought, well, actually, if I could interview TEDx organizers specifically to my clients, even better, about like what is not on the website. What speakers are you specifically looking for this year? Even like what gaps have you got this year? What subtle things do you really puts you off a speaker in the application stage? And so to do that interview, I have to have a podcast. So there was before I even launched it, it was very valuable to me. And I was doing these interviews for a while because in that sense, I had no urgency to launch the podcast because it was, serving its value for me and for my clients before it even launched. Then it launched, and it's great for marketing. So the interviews end up being, 45 minutes that go straight to, my clients can watch them. Like the timing of it is essential. And then maybe 4 or 5 months later, the edited version goes out on the podcast. And that's obviously getting awareness out there. And the only people who listen to that podcast are aspiring TEDx speakers, or they've accidentally clicked on something wrong. So, so it was just, if I wasn't a podcaster, then I don't know if I would have just added that on there, because I was very reluctant to start another podcast.
Because it's a lot of work. I mean, it's like a business in itself to have your own podcast. And I'm always like mind blown with all of my friends who have multiple podcasts. I'm like, do you sleep? And
I didn't want to be that guy either. But it was just because, and it was like the final piece of the puzzle was making it valuable for how could I was just strategizing for a while, and how could I make it useful before it even launched? And it was nice going into it. If no one listened to it, I know some people, obviously people listen to it, then, it's already served its purpose, number one. And I couldn't do that aspect of this, my unique, offering or process wouldn't be as unique without things like that. It just really ticked a lot of boxes before I even launched. And it's good.
Well, you and I share a role where we are often icons of influence at Steve Olsher's New Media Summit, where we are flooded with all of these great experts who want to be on our shows. You've got 2 shows that you're filtering through a lot of requests to join. One of the things I would love, from the perspective of you've got 2 successful shows that you're booking guests for, what are like the top 2 things you're looking for from a guest that would get them on your show?
Again, this links into why I think it's valuable, and I've kind of gone down this route. Honestly, obviously, if you're a TEDx speaker, you can't walk straight onto my show, but there's you'd have to do something really weird not to get on there, I think, if you approach it the right way, because you've just been pre-qualified, and that's kind of the value of it as well. Obviously, for one show, you have to have a TEDx talk if you want to be interviewed or be organizing a TEDx. For the other, Awaken Your Alpha, it means that you've got something, an idea worth sharing that is so important to you that you've either gone after a TEDx or someone's found you said, God, this is a great idea. They've done the pre-qualification. You've probably likely worked for 6 months to a year on that idea, fine-tuning it into a 15-minute talk. And my shows are generally half an hour. So a 15-minute, very concise idea with a few questions, it's golden. And I can tell, I've been let down. I can tell the difference between someone who's done that, because it's not just, oh, I'm a TEDx speaker. You've had to have gone through the process, and it does change you. It's very powerful in that to get clear on your message. So that would be the first one. TEDx speakers are obviously very good. Book is nice, but not essential, because I feel like books more and more, at least in the sort of people I have, a book of some shape or form.
Yeah.
I think just doing a bit of homework. I'm sure that you've heard this repeated lots of times. You can spot a mile off the kind of the spat gun approach that someone's just sending out, generic emails, doesn't know anything about you, your show, and it's very obvious. So yeah, do a little bit. I mean, leaving a review. I don't know if it's when you've had a podcast for a while, some people might think, he must get loads of reviews. He wouldn't know if he's not bothered. So someone to take that literally 60 seconds is a smaller percentage of people. And I actually have that as anyone who wants to be considered. I ask that, because again, if they're like, I can't be bothered, I'm like, well, you'd probably say realistically, it costs anywhere between $200 and $400 per episode to produce it with time and different things on the low end. And they can't be bothered for 60 seconds. And that's with me asking them. It's even nicer when people have gone and done that. And it's a little bit of homework and why not, I could talk about all these things. That's another one. Yeah. Just that. What would be a good topic and be a bit more specific, but yeah.
I think that's the thing that always comes out of when we're together as a group getting these pitches is like, let's drop into some specificity. Like, let's find that title that we go, I get what my listeners are going to get from this. I totally agree with you on that. One thing about the reviews, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I hit this home on people all the time. Like, look, if you're going to pitch me, at least go rate the show and do some kind of a give.
Yeah, and I even put in when I ask them, I'm like, hey, it's even nice if you listen to it, but hey, look, that's your your decision on it. I'm put a review in. So yeah, if they're going to look at it for 20 seconds, I mean, you could read a few reviews or whatever, or you could listen to 20, whatever you wanted to. But again, you'd probably want to listen to it 5 minutes, 10 minutes if you want to be on the show. Why? Because for all by your standards, it could be rubbish, or it might not be your cup of tea. So I think it's and just while you're there, just do it.
Yeah,
really easy.
I totally agree. And what a little known fact that I don't think people realize is we have technology where those reviews pop up on our dashboard. Like, I literally log into the back end of my website and your reviews are populating. And so I always like to spotlight those reviews, especially the really specific ones where somebody's taking the time to write a specific one. I will give you a spotlight on the podcast. I will give you a spotlight in social media, because I know you've given me a gift and I will be happy to give you one back. Not doing it.
Yeah. I just thought of something just quickly, because I've never mentioned this, but this is something that, again, takes the, because again, a review is a review. I'm happy with all reviews, but sometimes when it's, someone's guested on the show, I'd love a review. They literally go and put the review like, I was a guest, and they almost write it as, I was a guest, Adam made me put this review. And it's like, it's all about them, not about the show. It's like, I'm reviewing this because I was a guest on the show. It was just a bit like, and I mean, for anyone reading it, it just devalues the review for them, because people are like, well, so a review of the show, it can be a brief. You could literally write great or something. Obviously, the more the better. But if you just put in I was on this show, that's why it's great. Or Adam was a great host when I was on. I mean, yeah, that's okay, but I mean, just think it is supposed to be a review of the show. So it's just a thought.
Be authentic, my friends. Be authentic, be real, as we've heard from so many of the guests, be a good guest and make the host look good. It's just that simple. So Adam, I've seen you showing up on a lot of other people's podcasts, a lot of other shows. You're here today. Have you been making podcast guesting and taking your guest expertise out on other people's shows a part of your client attraction strategy?
Yeah. So for 2020, I made the decision I wasn't going to interview any more people than I got interviewed by. So I'm literally just tracking it. And again, if you don't measure it, you got no idea. So it's very hard if you don't track it, it just goes away. So I've got them literally, everyone's numbered, And if one goes too far ahead, I'm like, I have to make a conceited, a harder effort on the other one. And I thought at the start of the year, just do 50 interviews and 50 being interviewed as guests on another podcast. And I don't actively seek them out, but I'm already on almost, I think, about 50 for each already. And for the summer, I've slowed right down. But I want to go out and hunt. But yes, in answer to that, this was the first year that I thought, I'm going to have that standard, because with the wave of more and more demand to get on the podcast, I could quite easily just spend, and I mean, not earn money from this, but I could quite easily, if you don't say no to certain things or, be disciplined with your time, just be interviewing people day after day. I don't know why I'll do that, but that's, you'd have to be disciplined and just say, hey, for me as well, there's only so many shows I can get out. And there's ways around that, but I'm so far out. I was for an interview now, it's end of March to book in for an interview. And then the backlog after that to even get them out is huge. So that's one of the challenges I'm coming up, that almost too much demand. And so I'm very, I'm trying to come up with ways to either just stop another layers to qualified people. And also, that's the challenge I'm having at the moment. But so being on other people's podcasts as well, I thought I'm not going to do more than one than the other. And the only other time I really went for podcast guesting was when the book came out in 2018. So years before that, I was getting asked on podcasts. I'm like, hey, when the book comes out, thinking it'd be sooner, and it took so. And so then I kind of just did a big hit all the podcasts as much as possible in that period, and then left it. And then this year, just an ongoing, usually looking to do one guest interview a week average. But obviously it's been a bit more than that.
So let's talk about the book for a minute, because I was hoping someone would bring this up. I think it can be very powerful. Of course, everything's about timing, to do a podcast tour to help get traction for a book launch. And even if you're self-publishing or you're getting published by a big name author, we have to do a lot of our own marketing. So, if somebody was going to tap into podcasts as a way to get exposure for a new book or something else like an event or something, how would you give them some advice to maximize their exposure on podcasts?
Yeah, I'd say prep and plan really early, because I still get a lot of that. People thinking, oh, yeah, I've got a book coming out in a month or 2 months or 3 months, and they're thinking they just want to jump straight on and then it go out as well to be any value, at least for their launch. So, plan quite a long way ahead on that. But also, I have one of the options on my podcast booking is, a fast pass, and you can pay for to jump the line or do a specific date. And it literally is for things like book launches, courses launches, because that's when people, like I said, they say, oh, it's out in about 2 months. I'm like, well, if it just jumps into the regular queue, it's going to be a long time away. So I would plan early. If it is, reasonable amount to pick a specific date, if you can really coordinate that and any extras and add-ons, I'd go for that. Because when it comes to a book launch, it's an absolute bargain in terms of the effort compared to going out there live. We can't do that so much now, but I wanted to do the mixture of the old school. I flew over to England, I drove to Canada, and I did all these, went to events and did all the physical, book launches. And I knew at the time, if I'm honest, what would have been the best use of my time and money. I know it would have been staying in the basement, just doing podcasts and interviews and getting on, and even paying to get different places. It would have been way cheaper and I feel it would have had way more reach. But then it comes down to, okay, what sits right with you? What's authentic? I knew that going in. It's more fun to get on the road as well. So I did a combination. But if you purely want to be like, okay, what's the best bang for my buck and best use of my time? Being interviewed on podcasts or any, this obviously a Facebook Live, that's way more useful. I'm
glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of people, they don't plan ahead. They don't, because there's so much going on, it's hard to remember everything. But if you can have the discipline to think, where do I want to be when it goes live? And a lot of hosts will navigate with you. Like I've had friends of mine who have a book coming out and they're like, hey, any chance I could get on the show? And I'm like, sure. And I'll work with them to make sure it goes live about the time they need. But if they wait till last minute, it's really hard to orchestrate. Yeah. And Adam, I'm sure you know this, but maybe a lot of people who have had books already come out, you can revitalize your book sales. You can keep those book sales coming for years and years and keep yourself in the top 10, the top 50 list by continuing to share your book on podcasts for years.
Oh yeah, definitely. My book it wasn't specifically for a specific course or anything like that. It was a real legacy project. So I want it to be that consistent slow burner, and it's just got a big review from Robert Greene, or from the 48 Laws of Power. That's why and so I was nervous about that, not the interview, but actually asking him, because I hadn't caught up with him since he'd had a chance to have a look at it, and he probably gets sent a lot of books, and so he'd actually read it, and so I'm having the cover, the redone, and going for a hardcover, and having that that positive quote on there. So little things like that can just freshen up, and I want to always have it for podcasts and mention it all and everywhere I go. It's a simple calling card. As long as it's not just one of them books where it's, the front cover looks nice and when you open it, it looks like a child's done it, but actually you put the time into writing and, putting your best effort forward and taking the time. I think it's a really good way to get to know someone. If you're thinking of working with them, or if you're like me, I love books. I buy a lot of guest books who've been on the show, and I do a lot of, we switch books and do book swaps and different things like that. And if anyone wants to know about someone, and they've written a solo book, and they're promoting it, this is like something they're very proud of, that's going to really get you to know a lot about that person. You may want to work with them. And much like the Talk Accelerator podcast, the idea of that as well, if someone's interested and they're thinking, do I want to do this process with Adam? There's season 1 is 40 episodes. So 40 episodes, that's completely free. And I want to help as many people as possible. There's, I know 95% of people are going to listen to that podcast, are going to listen to it, get a load of useful stuff and crack on by themselves. And that's awesome. That's absolutely fine. And so I think having a book and a podcast, just leveraging your time. Definitely.
Yeah, totally. I'm having this question come up about mistakes, and people always want to know like what to avoid, right? So I don't know if you've had like an epic mistake you realized you were making as a podcast guest, or you've seen people making them, or both. But is there anything you would advise people to make sure you really steer clear? Don't follow that path that's not going to get you where you want to go.
Yeah, I might have been a little bit guilty of it now, but it's quite rare, but only when it's relevant. For this, for example, I mentioned the book a few times. It's come up. We were talking about, in promoting a book, so it was relevant. So it's kind of in there stuff. But I mean, you can sometimes especially it's near someone's book launch, and I know they're on because they want to, get the eyes around their book and stuff. I prefer to all their ideas from the book. Like I'm there, I will make them look good. I will, I'll put them in the show notes. I will shout out. It's not a problem. But I have had it's quite rare-ish where someone, it almost feels like they're holding back, number one, and they're literally everything they're mentioning their book, like really just shoehorning it in there. And we're like, okay, we get it. If you've got a book out at the moment, we get it. That's what the whole show is going to be about. For example, the subject of the book, I would imagine, and give us all the best stuff from the book. And so it's just really, and almost holding back, saying, and I've had that. Don't say, to find out, get the book. There's a whole book worth of stuff. If you've got an idea, or you've only got 1 or 2 good ideas, and you think I have to hold back because that's in the book, it's just not the sort of the vibe of giving and putting it out there. And no one's going to think, they were so good in this interview, they gave so much great advice, I won't get their book, because they're probably giving it all away. It's just a very mindset.
Yeah.
So I mean that's pretty rare, but it does happen, and it's a sinking feeling, and I will dig it a few times, and then I'll just think that's the way this interview's, and I'm trying to help them, because if I'm feeling that already, the listeners, they're not face to face with them. They're going to be like, oh my goodness, this person is just on such a promotion about the book. They're not looking to give value. It's all about them. So yeah, that really turns me off. Yeah, and luckily that's reasonably rare. Yeah.
I have a cousin thing that people have done, and one guy in particular did this, really big name in my industry, and he literally name dropped every single program he offered within the span of 3 minutes. And I was just like, oh, what are you doing? And it went on and on. And I thought, we do see, there is a little bit of a magic formula to sharing a tip and weaving in something that you do. And if you do it really gracefully and in a value giving way, it's natural. But when you're like, well, if you get this and you do this and you do this and you name drop, it just, bleh. So I would say a little bit of a cousin to what you said,
No, definitely.
Work on your seeding strategy.
Yeah. I think, just so if you're a guest on a podcast, just come in with almost like that. It's got to be like, unless it's personal stuff, like nothing's off bounds in terms of, you don't think, oh, what can I share in terms of my knowledge and what can I hold back? Like, if you ask a question, answer it to the best of your ability. Yeah. Like, we don't have that much time. You don't have to worry, you can just give as much as possible in that time. You put your best foot forward, as it were, and don't worry about that. And I can tell, as I say on occasion, when someone's like trying to work out like what not to share type stuff, and it's just weird because again, and the other thing, if someone's not tuned into their holding back, they may just think, oh, is that their best advice? Wow, that's not that good.
Yeah, and I know I've struggled with that at times because for me, it's like to fully unpack a strategy sometimes, like, do we really have time to get in all this? And then you hit the high note too high and people don't get it. And so one of the things that I think really works, Adam, and I know you use things like this, but if you can learn to teach in formulas, it really helps keep you on track without like worrying, like, am I giving too much? Am I giving away the formula? Am I teaching them everything and they're not going to want more? Like, just learn how to structure things into formulas that allow you to add massive value without, spending 25 minutes trying to teach one point.
Yeah, definitely. And if you do the formula type stuff as well, I'm a big believer, that the value is in the individual attention and work, and also in the, so you've got the formulas for individual attention and also going into the detail. If you've got a formula, like you say, you just don't have the time to go into all different areas. And the accountability is huge as well, I think. So, because the information is out there. So that's why I think it's not worth, holding back in that sense, because it's out there. And, people value what they pay for. If they get it for free, that's probably sometimes of a downfall because people think, oh, because you've given it away, sometimes it's not valued in that way. But hey, it's,
Hey, I want to give a little shout out to Deb Coleman and Christopher Vogelman. They have really been getting a lot of value and sharing a lot of stuff along the way. I've been trying to post your comments. I don't know if you can see them or not, Adam, but yeah, it's nice, huh? Like I really, they were just getting some great golden nuggets. So I wanted to showcase some of those along the way. Thank you both so much. And I know we'll have more coming along. Adam, we're coming to a close here. What if somebody wants to, obviously we want to encourage people to come listen to both your podcasts, but if there's one first step someone could make to work with you or maybe even book you on their show, what would you like them to do? And I'll post it for you.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, just to echo what we've been saying, to be truly authentic, I mean, just listen to, and on the same thing, the TEDx talk falls into that category as well. If someone leaves a review, I mean, that's for me, that's even rarer than a podcast review. So that probably catch my attention. And that really sums up what Awaken Your Alpha is, and that's why that that sort of platform is useful as well, because you can see me speak. It's about 4 or 5 years old now, but it's the core of it is still, the message is still there. That would be it. Leave a review, reach out, comment, or share the podcast to someone if there's something you liked. Yeah, hey, on that front, it doesn't take much. I'm easily pleased in that. I'm very approachable, and like you said like we're just wrapping up now. And so my mindset coming into this is, how can I squeeze as much value in? And I'm left thinking, we don't have enough time. So that's I got kind of the reverse. There's not enough time. So I think and for any podcast, unless you're going on like a 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast or something, you're gonna run out of time. So do not hold back. And that's nothing for a guest. Find out what is the ideal time for the interviewer when you start. Because I've done 10-minute interviews and I've done 45-minute. And you do approach it in a different way. You might relax in if you've got 45 minutes. If it's like a 20-minute, that does change things, and you don't want to be rambling quite so much, maybe.
Yeah, like I always say, if you've got some core talking points, you can stretch them for longer ones. You can shrink them and like really hit those catchphrases, and it makes a big difference to stay on track. And Adam, do you have like I guess one of the things I posted about the Awaken Your Alpha podcast, but do you have something online they should start with you? Any place you would want them to reach out, or just, hey, go listen to my podcast and rate and review it for me?
Yeah, I'd say I'm going to keep it pretty simple. Yeah, listen to the podcast, but ayalpha.com. If anyone's interested in the Talk Accelerator or getting a TEDx talk, TEDx review. I see Christopher Vogelheim. Yeah, you can do that on the YouTube channel. Where the TED, if you search TEDx Adam Lewis Walker or TEDx Awaken Your Alpha, that'll come up on YouTube, and then there's comments below the YouTube video. Sharing that. But just any way your preference. If you like a book, go to Amazon and you can check out the reviews of the book, and I'd love you to get a copy of that. But listen to the podcast. Whatever floats your boat in them realms. I think it's kind of a little smorgasbord for you to choose from. But just choose one and go there and connect to me. That'd be good. Instagram's always quite a good one as well. Adam Lewis Walker.
Adam, I know you have a million things going on in your life. I really appreciate you squeezing in a few minutes to share your wisdom and your insights. And you're just one of my favorite podcasters. You're part of our podcast squad. I don't know. What do we call ourselves? Our podcast tribe. I don't know. We're something. But I appreciate you being here today so much and helping us inspire people. My whole goal through this series has been to inspire people to get out of their own way, to get that magnetic message that they feel confident and excited to share, and get out on podcasts and virtual stages so you can like create some buzz and momentum around your work. So thanks so much for being part of it, Adam. Appreciate you.
No worries. Yeah, I just echo that, and I say, if you feel nervous and you think, oh, I'm not quite ready, just jump on it. Start somewhere, because your only way you get to like your 300 podcast guesting is by doing number one, and it will be cringy. We're all our first or second or third is a little bit. It's going to be. So you just get through, do the reps, and then you just keep on it. Commit to being on podcast if that's what you want to do.
And be consistent. Be consistent. Consistent visibility is what makes or breaks it for you. So, Adam, you're the bomb. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Well, this has been another Power Pack Day. This is the last of our series for now. I may have been inspired to do more of these down the road. Let me know if you'd like to keep seeing these kinds of conversations. If it's been valuable, share this with your community. And for now, if you are considering how you can actually tap into podcasts and really be able to get your message out in a bigger way, but you don't know what all the pieces are, join me for my masterclass, melaniebenson.com/podcast-masterclass. We'll see you there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye, everybody.